And we're right about on time for item number item number 3, Mr. Reisenweber.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's always nice to come before you all and talk a little economic development. We've had a good run of it as of late, and you all are certainly aware of the first issue, as you've had opportunity to look at this document and discuss this with me in executive session on a couple of occasions now. The nuts and bolts of it have not changed from the discussions that we had. And my understanding is that you've had an opportunity to look at the payment or the payment in lieu of tax agreement for Project Shuttle. I'm still calling it Project Shuttle. I guess I can call it Rockwool now that it's been let to the press. We're very excited about the project. Things are moving along very, very well. And this is one step in the process to continue the ball moving. So I'm happy to answer any questions that I can about the document. It's been through numerous legal iterations. Mike Carl at Bowles Rice, who's drafted more than one payment in lieu of tax agreement over the years, drafted this for us. Widely regarded as one of the best tax attorneys in the state of West Virginia, so we have a lot of confidence in the work that Mike did for us. It's been reviewed by everybody's attorney that's involved, so it's been through Ranson's looked at it, Tim Stranko's looked at it, Nathan, of course, has looked at it. I sent it over to Stephanie as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. I'd like to point out the good part of it. If you get to the second exhibit, there's a chart there that illustrates the actual payment, so you all can get a feel for how that plays out over the course of the agreement and the revenue that the county will generate.
I'm sorry, Mr. Reisenweber, I haven't seen this.
It wasn't. You told me not to put it in the packet.
Oh.
You had asked me not to put it in the packet. You called me and said, don't include the agreement.
Oh, I didn't mean at the exclusion of the commissioners.
Okay.
My fault. That's not real helpful, is it? Sorry about that, folks.
Is it a work product? Is that, I mean, is it public? Is it a public document?
If you approve it today, it will be a public document.
All right, got it.
I can.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think we need to.
Is that okay?
Yeah, we
I
need
mean,
to
that's
look at it.
the nuts and
I wanna
bolts
see
of
it.
it.
Yeah.
I can explain. I'm
Okay.
sorry about that, Stephanie.
That's
I
all
apologize.
right.
I didn't intend for that not to be distributed to the commissioners. We talked about this a couple of times. The way the payment in lieu of tax agreement works is the Development Authority, in this case, will take title to the real estate, both personal property as well as real estate, and that allows for the payment in lieu of tax to be put into place. It's a 10-year agreement. You can see there that the first year during construction, there's a payment there that the company's agreed to make, and then the abatement will go into effect. As you all recall, on the personal property side, when competing against Virginia that does not charge this tax, we sometimes have to be a little more aggressive to compete, level the playing field with the states that we normally compete against. So the equipment will be salvage valued at the end of it. That's 5% of book value. And that will require, actually the entire project will require a special appraisal by the State Development Office. They have industrial appraisers that can do this kind of work. Obviously, our county assessors can't afford to keep someone on staff for you know, these rare appraisals. So the state will help us with that, and we'll have a better feel for what that dollar figure will be going forward. But you can see in that chart what they've agreed to pay over the period of the agreement, and if you get towards the bottom, you get a feel for what that number ultimately is going to be. I think by the time it's all said and done, they'll be paying a substantial amount in taxes to the county, so we're pretty pleased about that, and hopefully this will allow Michelle and you all to plan accordingly for the revenue that will be coming in from the project as it moves forward.
I'm not clear on the personal property. What I'm reading, it looks like it will never be taxed at its full value, only 5%?
It'll be salvage value. Of course, it'll be, you know, it's going to be depreciated over that time too. But yeah, that'll be 5% of book value. So it's what they have it on their, carry it on their books for. and it'll be 5% going forward once the pilot agreement is completed.
So they'll never pay full value on their personal property?
They'll pay salvage value. That's correct. Now, that doesn't include, if they have additional equipment that gets brought online, that's different. This is just the upfront machinery and equipment.
Okay, all
So-
right, that's what I was very concerned about.
In other words, if, assuming that they're here, say 15 years from now or whatever,
They better
and
be.
they acquire a new piece of equipment for whatever reason, that's not covered under
Not
this.
covered under this.
Right.
They pay the full freight on personal property tax for
It's
that.
only on
equipment.
their initial equipment.
Right.
This was a competitive.
Oh, I understand that.
Yeah, competitive
I know
issue, because
that, but I'm
Virginia,
just
it's just,
trying to
it's
see
an
the difference.
unfortunate, they tax differently, and to level the
Yeah,
playing
they
field, we
sure
have to
do.
do it. No one likes to have to do these things, but to compete, we have to be aggressive about it. I think this one is actually, I was actually pretty pleased with what they were willing to agree to. You can see a fairly large dollar figure there towards the end of that as it phases fully. Keep in mind, it's a $150 million capital investment. We expect about that to be split half and half. So the real estate side will be about $75 million, the personal property, the equipment, the machinery. You had a chance to see it. There's a lot of incredible equipment in there.
I know, that's why I didn't like it.
And I sympathize with all of you all, and we don't do this very often.
Right.
But, sometimes we have to make an exception on this one. But even 5%, keep in mind, 5% of $75 million that's no small.
change.
That's no small amount.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to factor in depreciation, though, as the years go on, so it's going to slowly decrease
it will.
at 5%. So it's initially that much, but as depreciation kicks in like year 9, I mean, it's not going to be near year 1.
No, it won't.
So-
It won't.
But anything new coming?
That,
they
yeah.
have
anything
to
new,
upgrade.
they're already talking about possible expansion. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why they chose the site. They anticipate, if their sales go according to what they think, according to how they've been doing, 5 years from now, that the facility as it's going to be constructed will be at capacity. So now that's not to say that Deloitte won't come back and ask for another
Right.
pilot
I-
agreement on any
no.
new stuff, but as of right now, this is just on what's being done today.
Well, and also that they're only using maybe half of the site right
third of it.
now. A third,
third of
okay,
it.
even less. So
Yeah.
there is the potential for growth.
Absolutely.
And
And-
lots of jobs.
And I'd like to, if I can comment on that, frankly, that is what I'm actually most excited about. I know a lot of times we get caught up in the number of jobs. That's great, don't get me wrong, that's part of what we're trying to do here. But what I'm really excited about is there's probably going to be close to $15 million worth of infrastructure driven to this site. When you figure in the road that's going to need to be put in, that'll go all the way to the northern end of the property line, so that will not only open up the east side of the property for additional development, it'll also open, and that's in Ranson at the
Right.
orchard site. Once you get to the northern end of the property line, that's all county land. So there's hundreds of acres to the north and to the east, to the northeast, kind of envelopes the orchard site that's in the county. So you're talking a water line, a sewer line, a gas line, and some road improvements, both on the site as well as turn lanes on the old Route 9. So there's going to be a lot of infrastructure driven to the site that I think is going to set the county up well moving forward. That's what I'm really excited about, in addition to the jobs, of course.
And so why did this company decide to locate in West Virginia?
I think there are a lot of reasons.
curious.
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons. I think we were able to make the case that we've got a qualified workforce. That's a critical piece. I'm not going to tell you that the incentives didn't help. I think at the end of the day, it's the site. They needed a site. They wanted a site that was quote off the beaten path a little bit, similar to what we saw down in Mississippi. So I think, and I think location, location, location. It's proximity to that DC market.
East
There's
Coast, yeah.
East Coast, there's a lot of construction going on. They're in the construction space, and I think they look at this as a cost, like in my elevator speech, a cost-effective alternative to the high prices of the DC market. We really do kind of fit in that space very well, and I think we were able to effectively make that case. So, you know, I think there's a lot of things to be pleased about with this project. I think it shows that Jefferson County's a good place to do business. They, you know, with a team of consultants like Deloitte, they wouldn't have recommended this place or picked it out if it didn't fit all of their needs. So I think the fact we were able to meet their needs
And compete on a national level.
exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So I think it really shines a bright light on Jefferson County, and I couldn't be more pleased about it. So.
A potential plus on this is that people are hesitant to jump into the pool, even though there's a sign saying, come on in, the water's fine. But once it happens, then it opens up the possibility of other companies thinking, and I know you've got a couple that you're looking at, and hopefully this provides an added spur to further type stuff.
Absolutely, Peter. In fact, the day after the announcement, we got 3 inquiries in the office over the phone, which is atypical for all of them to come in one day, and clearly it was due to the press that we got on the project. One was was a larger scale project represented by consultants out of the Tyson's Corner area. So I think success breeds success. Yeah. I think you're exactly right, Peter. I think the other thing, what's great about it, back to the infrastructure, this site's going to be already teed up. We won't have to go through all these machinations again the next time we have a user that needs a space similar to what Rockwool's using. So that's really exciting, is we won't have to do all this again. The infrastructure will already be there. So.
To that point, can you explain exactly how that infrastructure is getting there and who is paying for the infrastructure?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Josh. I know, or Commissioner Compton, I know you're obviously concerned about infrastructure issues, particularly sewer. How this is going to work, obviously you all know the property's in Ranson. So Ranson has put an RFQ out for an engineer. So Ranson will be administering the funding. The funding is coming from the State Development Office. The State Development Office has a carve-out for infrastructure projects. We call it the closing fund. So this money will come out of that closing fund. This is not, this will not be put on the backs of the ratepayers. This is money that's coming out of the Infrastructure Jobs and Development Council, of which I sit on as the regional representative. 20% of that money that's appropriated by the state legislature is used for projects like this for the state office. They use it around the state. So we're going to.
So it's 100% funded by the state? Okay.
It'll be funded by their usage. So we're basically taking a lien on the water use. We're taking a lien on the sewer use. There's an alternate mainline extension agreement put in place on the sewer. I know you'll be pleased to see that. So everybody that's onto that line will pay in to help to retire that debt sooner, and the state will get their money back, and then they can put it into another project somewhere else in the state. So their water use and their sewer use will basically bankroll the costs, and the state's upfronting the money. So there's, I want to, if the press is in the room, the ratepayers will not be paying for these infrastructure improvements.
So this has no direct correlation whatsoever to this contentious sewer issue?
Well, Josh, I'm certainly happy to discuss that with you. There could be, I'm not an engineer, but there could be some synergy between the PSD project and how we get sewer to this site. I don't know if the timing's going to line up. So that was a concern for the state. It was a concern for Rockwool. So basically, Ranson is going to design this line, the route of this line. Their engineer's going to design the route. And from some conversations I've had with PSD engineers, there could be a point where pieces of that project could help with getting the line to the Orchard site. But at the end of the day, that's an engineering question. You know, we don't have the luxury necessarily with all the issues swirling with the PSD to slow down Rockwool in order to address that. So they're going to have to continue to be bifurcated, although down the road there certainly are elements, from what I understand, of the PSD project that could be helpful to the Rockwool project. So at the end of the day, the engineers, Josh, I don't want to get out of my comfort zone on the engineering piece. So
Are the
that's
two
about as
mutually
much.
exclusive, though? Is the rock salt dependent on that PSD line that's?
No. That's what I want to be clear about, and that's the reason why it's being done this way, is we've got to make sure that Roxel gets what gets what it needs independent of the PSD issue that we're all grappling with right now. So that's the reason it was funded this way. That's a chunk of money that's being taken out of that fund at the IJDC. It will go directly to run a sewer line there. There are some good things that are happening about it. It looks like the route might actually help out the school system. Looks like we may be able to tap in with a gravity line to the new campus that's going to be the piece of ground that they bought. So this will hopefully help the school system tremendously on getting service to that site for particularly sewer and possibly water as well. So there are some other good ancillary benefits that will come from driving this infrastructure, which, like I said, is really what I've spent a lot of my time working on the last few years, and what I'm really excited about is I think this is really going to help us. This will help the sewer discussion tremendously, I think. So.
One very quick last.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so essentially the taxpayers of West Virginia are going to front this money.
They're going to front it, but keep in
Okay.
mind the bill that the company is going to pay will pay it back. So they are fronting it. It's a loan, and their usage will pay for that over time. In fact, the water will probably get paid off fairly quickly because of the amount of water they're using. That'll pay back fairly quickly.
Who will provide water out there?
Well, Ranson's going to administer the contract. JUI is the water utility, so they'll be running the line out there. Yeah. So.
Yeah, is it a big amount of water that they're going to be?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
fair amount. Once they get to their second phase, it's a large amount of water. Lee Snyder has plenty of capacity, so he's fine. He's not batting an eye over the amount of water that he'll need to provide.
I
Yeah,
was just curious.
And
yeah, it's a big number.
And I don't know if this plant is going to be designed as the same one I saw, but
Be very similar.
They have their own water silo for backup fire suppression on site, so.
They're doing a similar thing
Yeah.
on this site,
Yeah.
so.
Very
In addition
wise.
to which, the sewage is minimal because most of that turns into steam and
So the sewer will take a little longer to pay back
Yeah.
because the volume isn't as high. The good thing about the sewer piece is it is a full alternate mainline extension agreement. So anyone that hooks on anywhere on that line, that money will go to expedite the payment back to the state for the line that goes in. So that'll be very helpful.
So does the Public Service Commission have to get involved in that, since that's such a line that is running?
That's a good question. I'm not sure what Ranson's situation is as far as PSC approval and the number of customers they have. I'm not sure how that's a good question.
I don't know
I'll
either.
check on that.
Okay.
It wouldn't shock me that they would have to sign off on it. I can't imagine for 1 minute that they wouldn't
Right.
because of the impact it's going to have. But I'll chase that down. I don't want to speak out of turn
No,
and say something
and
not
I don't
accurate.
want you to.
Yeah,
That was just.
it's a good
just
question. I'll
questions
check
pop
that
up.
That is a good question, actually, because if someone was against the project, they could file a motion, like a complaint or something potentially, and this could get, I mean, they're regulating utilities. I mean, JUI is a utility, I mean, sewer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you'd have to see the Public Service Commission at least offer something.
They would typically be the arbitrator of something like that. So,
A landowner next there, completely opposed to it, I mean, he has the right to petition the PSC, and I mean, this thing could get blown out.
well, I sincerely hope that's not the case. That would be, missing the forest for the trees. But let me do a little recon on that. It's a good question, Patsy. I know I don't think Charlestown for things like this has to go through PSC
they have
approval
enough
because of their
customers,
customer
right.
base. I'm not sure where Ranson is on that. I thought they had enough, but I'll ask. Let me
Jefferson
ask.
Utilities, though, is under PSC regulatory,
Yeah, I know.
so.
Let me ask a question, Patsy. It's a good question. I'll get back to you on that.
Mr. Reisenweber, do you have a copy of the proposed lease? Isn't there a lease that goes along with this payment in lieu of taxes agreement?
There will be. We haven't drafted that yet. Once all that gets, keep in mind, that won't occur until the building's completed and the.
I understand.
Yeah, so
But-
your answer to that is no, we don't yet, but we will.
Is there a time frame on the lease contemplating at this point, like a lease for a certain?
The lease would line up, the lease would line up with the length of the pilot agreement at a minimum. Yeah.
And what, in your mind, what would that length be?
Well, the pilot agreement's 10 years. Keep in mind, it's what's characterized as a synthetic lease. It's just basically on paper. It's a legislative workaround to allow, tax abatement's not allowed under West Virginia State Code. So this is the provision that was put in place by the legislature years ago to allow for this, so that we could compete better for these kinds of projects. So typically, it's all the way it's been characterized to me by our legal team is all the benefits and burdens stay with the lessee. It's really a synthetic lease on paper for the purposes of establishing ownership with an entity that's non-taxable.
So, we had a discussion before that they would never pay taxes, but if.
No, that's not.
Well, that they would never pay taxes on the personal property, that it would always be 5%. They would never pay the.
They'll
but-
pay the salvage value.
Right, but that's only for 10 years?
No,
No,
the
it's
salvage,
not.
after the expiration of the pilot agreement,
Uh-huh.
it'll be taxed at salvage value going forward
For the original.
for the original, yeah.
Person.
What they're
Anything
carrying on their
added
book.
out of, after the
Anything
first?
they add after
Yeah.
that pilot thing, they pay full
Right.
freight for personal property.
Unless
they come back and
Unless they come
request.
back and you all were
Make
to
requests.
incentivize it again. I look at that as a good problem to have, frankly, if they're expanding and wanting to do more.
That's which the legislature and governor could get together and realize their tax law in the state's a mess.
You know, it's interesting you say that, Josh. I'll give a little aside. When I was talking with Mike Carl was down at the legislature actually advocating for some substantive tax changes. In fact, when I asked him to do this, he says, you know, hopefully if we could get some tax reform at the
Right.
state legislature, you wouldn't need to do this, and you wouldn't need to do these, or at least not to the extent that you have to. But I would, you know, as county commissioners, you all would want to be real careful about how that's get crafted, because keep in mind, you know, personal property is a big source of your all's revenue. So if they do away with it or change it in any way, you all would need, yeah, you got to be very careful about how that
Oh,
impacts.
and that's how they do that in other states. I mean, they offset it with other.
The thing is, that somehow,
taxes,
in
yeah.
this state,
Balancing act.
we
Yeah,
got
it is.
capital goods linked with personal property, which is,
Yeah, I've already
They're
paid, I don't like
correct, but I
paying
mean-
taxes on my car after I've already bought it and paid taxes. It does seem, I don't like it any more than anybody else does.
yeah, but I mean, it's.
It is a little
it's-
antiquated.
We have
It's
to
a
be
stretch to
competitive.
sit there and say that big, huge amounts of machinery are somehow personal property, but that's, anyway,
We have to
be it as
figure
it
out how-
may, that's the law.
And we have to figure out how to be competitive with other states so that we don't get left holding the bag.
That's
and-
right.
And left out of these good opportunities that we've missed in the past for that reason.
I do want to just mention, you look at that chart, and I think you see a company that wants to pay their share. They're obviously going to ask for incentives, but, you know, there's some large dollar figures at the end of that. And they also, you know, we talked with them about paying during construction, and they were willing to, you can see there early on, there's, I think, $225,000 that'll come into the county during construction. Yeah, so that'll be a nice little chunk of change to help on the revenue side early on in the agreement.
But we can't get used to it because it's only going to be a one-time within a
Bump
certain
up,
period.
right?
Yeah, and then there'll be,
Higher staff
then it'll
based
go
on that.
away, but,
Yeah.
and then it'll come back
Right.
full bore later in the
I mean,
agreement.
it's, yeah.
Nathan, so are we going
Put
to
this back.
try to approve this and subsequently approve another part of this whole transaction, like the leases, or how is this working?
The lease would be, you all wouldn't need to approve
No?
the lease. No, the lease would be between the JCDA and Rockwool.
My only small concern here is going back to the assessment of the property after this agreement expires. I guess I have a question about the assessor's ability to not assess the property at the value of the property. Now, I do understand that, because of the depreciation, the value of the personal property will go down. But I just have that question in my mind.
Well, keep in mind, if you notice, the assessor is a party to this agreement, as is the school board, as is City of Ranson. Anyone has, quote, taxing authority, if you will. So I've talked with our assessor. She's on board with this. She's been very supportive of these kinds of things whenever we've come to her about these. So she will be a signer to this, as will the school board. I've talked to the school board, and they've been very supportive as well.
I guess my question is a legal question. She has an obligation to set property its true and actual value. When it's part of the pilot agreement and you own it, that doesn't matter. But once it's no longer owned by a government entity, her charge is to set property its true and actual value. And so that's my question is, do we need to extend the pilot agreement out? Because I assume that she's spoken with, and maybe we need to speak with the tax department, but that's my question is, once the pilot agreement expires, what authority does the assessor have to not set property its true and actual value?
That's a good legal question, Stephanie. My assumption is that this document would provide that. Now, if we need to go back, maybe it is the kind of thing where 10 years from now we come back to the commission and revisit it. But might not hurt to have a conversation with Mike Carl.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to hold up this for something that's going to be an issue 10 years down the road, but it's good forward thinking, and I don't, again, not a lawyer, I don't want to get out of my comfort zone, but we could ask Mike Carl that. My assumption all along was,
right,
wrong, or indifferent, but that this document would kind of guide that, and you're all agreeing to it, would prevent you from having to come back 10 years from now and say, hey, how do we go about doing this? Well, the document kind of guides what was agreed to at the time, so.
I don't want to harp on this, but the Public Service Commission issue is kind of like bugging me, because JUI is regulated by them, and the Public Service Commission is granted, they're supposed to look out for the ratepayers, and JUI has a substantial number of ratepayers. Wouldn't they have to approve some sort of extension that big for a JUI type utility?
Yeah, I'll have to check on that, Josh. I will. I don't don't want to speak out of turn, but because this is, I don't know if it's treated differently because it's not coming out of the rate pay. He's not going and asking for, where I would see the PSC coming in is if we went to Lee and said, look, we need you to run a water line here. Tell us how much it's going to cost, and let's figure out how to do it. And then he would have to go in front of the PSC and ask for a rate increase. Well, that's not the situation here. So I don't know what the trigger is for PSC oversight. I don't know if it's when you ask for a rate increase or if you're going before, for some sort of funding mechanism.
I'd like clarification, because he, as a water utility, is regulated by them.
Sure. I will chase that down and find out what the role of the PSC is. And
wouldn't this be some like equivalent alternate line extension agreements?
Yes.
That's typically a utility.
Yeah, the PSC typically would sign off on an alternate mainline extension agreement. So that may be where, that may be where, but let me confirm that. I mean, typically they would sign off on one of those.
I don't anticipate that would be.
Oh, no, I think there'd be probably hell to pay at the PSC if they didn't approve it. I mean, we've put a lot of balls in motion. I think, I'm not saying they wouldn't look at it from a regulatory perspective, but I just don't know the answer as to when that kicks in. Typically, they would, I think, have to sign off on an alternate mainline extension agreement.
I think I've looked at a recent order from the Public Service where, a utility was sanctioned because they didn't tell the PA where they were putting some lines. Okay. And so I would think that at some point the Public Service Commission would have to at least say, okay, we see this, we understand, but I don't know. So that's why
I can
just
go
have a
back and look at that. We've got an MOU,
Right.
we've got MOUs with the city of Ranson on the utilities. I can go back and look. I don't recall PSC being a signer to the MOU. However, they typically would be signer to an alternate mainline extension agreement to avoid the very situation that you brought up. Yeah.
Don't want that.
No,
I mean,
we
wanna
don't want
Make sure
that.
everything's
Yeah.
cross your Ts and dot
Yeah,
your Is. type thing,
absolutely.
so.
We don't want
will-
them to come back later and say, well, why didn't we know about this?
Right.
Right.
That's a good question. Let me chase that down, and I'll get you all an answer to all that.
Not to prolong this discussion, but as long as we're talking about utilities, there's the aspect of Mountaineer Gas, which is also regulated by the PSC. And we know the hullabaloo that's going on up in Morgan County. As the saying has it, stuff flows downstream, Potomac flowing downstream. So, and I know that Eric Lewis did a bang-up job in front of the
He did.
Shepherdstown City Council in talking about that, but that's another potential thing out there in the strip that needs to be nailed down.
It does, and that's part of the reason why we wrote that op-ed. It's part of the reason why we're, doing everything we can to get our side of the story out. The more I spend on Facebook and the more, I try not to do it, but sometimes I get sucked in. I'm shocked at the disinformation that's being passed around. I mean, this project's being compared to the Keystone Pipeline, and it's nowhere near. It's a distribution line. It's 8 to 10 inches.
Yeah.
It's not something a toddler can walk through standing up without bumping his head. I mean, this is a radically different. And the other fundamental difference is, those Keystone Pipeline type projects, they're typically pass-throughs to get to a port or get to some refining facility. They are not lines that folks can tap into. That is not what we're doing. I have no interest in disrupting everyone's property and just for a pass-through. We want the gas. We need to use the gas. It's not something that we want to just be a vector for running it through.
Same thing as the
It's not
tap
the
thing.
same thing. And that's what we've really tried to combat in the press and because some of the naysayers are, they're a little loose with the facts sometimes. I understand their opposition to fracking and to fossil fuel use, but at the end of the day, this is a more environmentally sound alternative to coal, and it's being demanded by certain sectors of the economy. And I think it has a lot to do with the reshoring of manufacturing that we're seeing all over the country. Being able to have a much more affordable source of energy to operate your plant is a game changer. That coupled with workforce concerns that companies are having overseas. So.
It seems our staff over there still is looking at some concerns.
Time to go with this, or?
Should we take a recess until they can tell us what's happening? Or,
Well, where is this leading in the immediate, by that, in the next couple of minutes? Obviously, you want a motion approved.
We need to get it
approve the,
approved and move forward to get the others to sign it, as well as the other MOUs. This is one of the first dominoes that has to fall. Ranson actually took this up at their council, the most recent council meeting, so they've actually already passed it. And I just want to stress to you all, there have been so many lawyers looking at this thing, my head's spinning. So it's had a lot of legal review. I'm happy to get any clarifications from Mike Carl, certainly your questions about the PSC, what happens in 10 years on the salvage side. Those are all good questions.
That is my only concern, is that I don't want to obligate the assessor to something she can't legally do. When I read the agreement, it doesn't really say, I mean, for the term of the agreement, it's at salvage value. Right, I don't, yeah.
We don't want to put ourselves in a position of following the guidance of one prominent legislator who said, well, we got to pass the thing so you can see what's in it.
This isn't Obamacare, Peter. Not quite on that scale,
It'll turn out a lot better.
I understand your sentiment. I didn't expect that to get brought up this morning.
See, we can go down all kinds of
I
different
expected the
rabbit
sewer
paths.
question, but I
Yeah.
didn't expect that one.
You knew that was coming.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. I wasn't surprised at that.
I think we can approve it and get,
Go ahead and
my
approve
hope would
it
be we can
and-
approve it, and then we can
So
get
what-
some clarity to what happens when this, as
Address-
it
I mean,
relates
it's
to.
really an issue for the assessor. I mean, she can't sign it if she can't do it. So that's really her obligation under the agreement is how the property is going to be assessed. That's not your obligation, is to say you're okay with that. So the assessor is the one who has to worry about how the property
And I'll,
is going to be.
And
I'll
it's-
get with Angie
get
and
that
we'll
worked
get
out.
Mike Carl involved and see what the, what
And-
needs to be done.
And it's,
If
I mean,
anything.
obviously, the assessor can't agree to anything that is,
Right.
isn't supported by law. So if, for some reason, that would be determined to be an issue, then the agreement would just have to be modified.
I think that's fair. I think we have plenty of time to hash that out, and we won't wait the 10 years, of course.
Right.
She'll need an
No.
answer before she
Right.
signs
Yeah.
it. So
Well,
I'll
she-
get
I mean-
Mike involved. I'll get him on the phone as soon as we get out of here.
It's a
Even
good-
if she's
good-
elected to another term, she probably, I mean.
That's a good catch, though.
It is a good
Because
catch.
it's important.
I
it'll be
gotta
important
admit, that
for
I
the
wasn't
future.
thinking
And
past.
understand, it's not in
Yeah.
opposition to that
No, I understand.
arrangement. It's whether or not she
She's
has
allowed to
the-
do it.
allowed
That's
to
a good
do it.
question. I wasn't thinking that way.
Because her charge is to assess property at its true and actual value.
Yeah.
So, and typically, if that doesn't happen, the state tax department comes in and says, you're not assessing.
The good
why
thing
are
about
you
this, Stephanie, is, this issue is statewide,
Right.
particularly
Right.
so these agreements typically have a provision of this nature, so I can't
Okay.
imagine we're reinventing the wheel.
Okay.
Ought to be pretty easy to ascertain
Okay.
what happens at that point.
Right, it's really her obligation, it's not, you don't assess value, so
Right.
it's really the assessor's.
Well, and I'm asking her to help us out, so I
Right.
want to help her make
Right.
sure that she's comfortable. So that's a good catch, and something I got to admit, I wasn't thinking, I just was under the assumption that she would be allowed to do it.
I mean, maybe it's possible that she is, but I'd like to clarify that for her
Good catch.
before she assigns.
We'll do that.
Okay, what I'm going to do is put a motion on the floor. Thus, I move to approve the pilot agreement for Project Shuttle as presented by the Director of the County Development Authority.
Second.
Is there any further discussion?
Nathan, if we approve this, and don't we need some sort of clarification with the assessor? That's my issue here.
Well, it's just that I don't think that we have any concern about the issue during the term of the agreement. And so therefore, I think that our Economic Development Authority chair here is going to, I think he's representing to us that he's going to ascertain, and we're approving the agreement for the term of the agreement. Should it need to be adjusted based on the extant state law, then that adjustment will have to be made.
My assumption is that Mike Carl he's written these before, so, but Josh, to answer your question, I will chase that down. And if we got to bring it back because it needs to be modified, then we'll do that.
Any further discussion? All in favor of approving the pilot agreement for Project Shuttle as presented by the Director of the Jefferson County Development Authority indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Next.
Thank you. The second agenda item that I have is you all are aware of the agreement that we have with the West Virginia Small Business Development Center for the business coach position. Matt Coffey's here with me today, and he's available to answer any questions as well. I'll just brief background. We were approached by Christina Oliver a couple of years ago about getting a business coach established in the Eastern Panhandle through a contract vehicle. And the state was willing to pay basically 2/3 of the cost of the position. And the Development Authority was asked to cover the other third. So we put that in our budget. You all approved that budget a couple of years ago, and that's how we've been operating going forward. Because the business coach position is part of a statewide network, they don't necessarily just work within the confines of a specific county. For example, Matt has a banking background. It's not odd for Matt to get pulled into helping a community or a business coach in another part of the state on a banking question. So that is, I just want to make sure you all understand, it is a network, and while he's housed in the Jefferson County Development Authority office, he does sometimes work outside of the Jefferson County. So, but he is the Eastern Panhandle Business Coach. So in light of that, I approached the Berkeley County Development Authority to assist in the cost share. So the Berkeley County Development Authority splits our cost share with us evenly. So that, to me, I think was a fairer way of financing the position. The state liked the idea because it pulled Berkeley County's commitment into the scenario, and I think it helps from a regional perspective to better serve particularly the small business community. So that's where we are now. It's moving along fine. I got a call from Josh Jarrell, who is general counsel for the development office, a few weeks ago, and apparently he's gotten word from the United States Small Business Administration that they have concerns about how these contract vehicles are structured, in that they don't have benefits. So right now, Matt is a 1099 employee. And Matt, if I'm talking about your personal finances in a way that you're uncomfortable with, just smack me or something, I'll stop. But I'm not going to get into all the details of that. But in general, he's had to get his health insurance through another mechanism, which is quite expensive. So in order to address the concerns of not only federal SBA but also West Virginia SBDC, the state contacted us and asked if the county would be willing to take on the business coach as a position within the development authority. Of the, how many coaches we have? 13, Matt? 19? How many? 15 currently. 15 currently. 2 of the coaches, Matt being one of the 2, are affected with this situation. So a lot of the coaches are either affiliated with one of the community technical colleges or university, or they're actually a formal employee of another entity. Matt is one of 2 around the state that is not. So what the State Development Office, who oversees the SBDC, has asked us to do is to bring him on as an employee. The good news is, I'm not asking you for money. You're like shocked at that, I'm sure.
Yeah,
they're actually they're actually willing to cover the costs. So they're still running some numbers on exactly how we would work out his salary, and because obviously benefits are a portion of the salary. The health care is the big piece. I talked with Michelle, our finance director. The cost of that is about $19,200 if Matt were to be on the family plan. That's the total cost, and then the retirement would be 11% of his salary. So you're looking at a cost of about $25,000. The state office is willing to pay that. Now, his contract right now stipulates that if the funding mechanism that we currently have in place for some reason doesn't hold, for example, let's say you all don't approve my portion of the cost share and I don't have any other way to pay it, or the state comes back and says, look, we just got our budget cut again, we got to cut coaching, or we got to cut staff, or something of that nature. He knows that he's at will, and that if that situation arises, he may be out of a job. That would not change under this situation. So if for some reason, and that would be written into his employment contract, as it is now. So if that situation arose where the state came back to us and said, hey, we got cuts, we can't afford this, we would come back to the drawing board and figure out how we would go about handling this. So the way I look at this is we're getting a full-time business coach for a mere fraction of what it would normally cost. So basically the state's paying, probably in this case, it would be almost 3/4 of the freight, and we're, with Berkeley County, paying probably the other 25%. Those are ballpark numbers. So, I think it's, frankly, to me, it's kind of a no-brainer. You all would have protections in that contract with him that if for some reason the funding wasn't there, you all wouldn't be then asked, hey, by the way, the state's cutting, county commission, can you pick this up, pay the difference? That is a decision you all would have the authority to make, and if the decision would be, sorry, we can't swing it, then obviously the business coach position would go away. I asked the question, I said, well, why don't you all just hire him? in the Small Business Development Center. They don't have an opening, and they don't have an open position that they could slide them into. They looked into that. They obviously would have to get the legislature to allow them to create another position. So they don't have that right now, and that's the reason they can't do it. So the request before you is to bring the business coach on as a full-time county employee with the provision that the county will pay the additional costs above what they're already paying. So your
But the
commitment would be
small
to
business.
That the West Virginia Small Business Development Center will pay the additional cost.
through the, I use the development office because they're a agency of the development office. So it's out of the Commerce Department.
Yeah, what you said was county.
Yeah.
So will that work like a pass-through?
What they do is Matt submits an invoice, and then we submit it to SBDC, and they reimburse us. So we front it.
We don't even,
Yeah, now how
It's
the,
gonna go on our insurance.
yeah, you go on your insurance,
The
so
Development
the
Authority pays our-
funding mechanics may need to be different, Patsy, to address what you're concerned about in that, is it a lump sum up front, or do we continue to handle it the way we're doing it now? Right now,
Okay.
it's pretty easy because it's just
Right.
his invoice for the salary piece. But Michelle, what we would do is pull Michelle in and figure out how the mechanics would go. And the state's being very flexible. They want to keep Matt. He's done a great job. We're pleased to have somebody that can actually focus on small business, to be able to, work up and down Main Street. We think that's a very, very important part of the economy here. And I'm very pleased that we've been able to have Matt. Like I said, he's doing a good job, brings a lot of banking experience, which is critical when you're trying to get projects funded and capitalized so that we can get folks opening new businesses. So, but yeah, a good point about the mechanics of it. I think because this would be new, but we'd pull Michelle in, and frankly, Josh in the state office seems very amenable to doing what's easiest. So we could work those mechanics out.
well, I'll move to approve the JCDA business county employee, provided additional costs are paid by the West Virginia Small Business Development Council.
Second.
A center, okay.
Any further discussion? All in favor of approving the JCDA business coach as a county employee provided additional costs are paid by the WVSBDC, indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Done.
Thank you all. Just in closing, I just want to sincerely thank all of you for your support of Project Rockwool, and of course what we're doing with the business coach. These are big things that are happening. We're very pleased with what's going on. We've got another building going up in the business park. I've got contracts going with another entity that's looking to come in. The Italian company team is in as we speak. They're meeting in my office. I'm headed back to further work out finalizing those things. So I just want to thank all 5 of you all for your support of economic development in the county. It's been tremendous, and I'm not saying that lightly. I mean it sincerely, and I think raising it on the revenue side is going to help as we move forward. So the more development we can attract, the better off your all's jobs, the easier your all's jobs will be, if easy is ever an adjective you would use to describe your jobs, because I know it's very, very tough. But I just want to sincerely thank you, and I know I speak on behalf of my board. You all have been incredible, and I want you to know on Rockwool, this project wouldn't have happened without your all's support. I mean that sincerely. So thank you.
Best wishes on full recovery.
Thank you. I'm putting on a good face, but having a herniated disc addressed on Monday, and hopefully we'll be able to walk straight.
Your son had that,
Yeah.
yeah,
Did he do okay?
great,
Good. That's,
but he listened,
oh, yeah, and
he did great.
my father's drilling that into me, listen to your doctor. So. But thank you all. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thanks, Peter.
He'll say, no more house calls.
If
you don't listen.
Me out. I had to go get my own doctor. Thank you all.
Thanks, John.